All right, now we're doing 18 of method argument from LRBT2. Rossi. It is undemocratic for people to live under a government in which their interests are not represented. So, children should have the right to vote, since sometimes the interests of children are different from those of their parents. Granted, okay, so now we're on to Smith. Granted, children's interests are not always the same as their parents'. Governmental deficits occurred by parents' generations will later affect their own generation's standard of living. But even if children are told about the issues affecting them, which is not generally the case, their conceptions of what can or should be done are too simple, and their time horizons are radically different from those of adults. So we cannot give them the responsibility of voting. So, our argument here that is being contested is that it is let me erase that. Is that children should have the right to vote. And how did we get there? Why should children have the right to vote? Because it is undemocratic for people to live under a government in which their interests are not represented, and children's interests are different than their parents. Great. And Smith is counteracting that by agreeing that children's interests are not the same as their parents, but saying they should not get the responsibility of voting because their conceptions of what are happening too simple, time horizons are different. Great. So we are looking at Rossi's argument. So how did Rossi get to the point where they were saying children should have the right to vote? Rossi got there by saying that it's undemocratic for people to live where their interests are not represented. Their interests are not represented, so children should vote. So somehow it's coming from a guiding principle. So we've got this idea that everyone has to live in a government where their interests are represented. So let's look into this. Does Rossi's argument make an appeal to a general principle? Yeah, this is looking pretty good. Rossi got to their conclusion by saying it's undemocratic for people to live in a government where they're not allowed to express their interests. He's looking pretty good. B, it denies the good faith of an opponent. Is Rossi saying that Smith is a bad person, or denying or saying that Smith is doing this in bad faith? No. C, it relies on evaluating the predictable consequences of a proposal. No, again, that's something that Smith is doing. Smith is trying to say, well, if we did let children vote, like these are the consequences of it. But Rossi is starting with a big argument saying that everyone should live in a government where their interests are represented. And that's how we got to children having the right to vote. D, it substitutes description for giving a rationale for a policy. Giving a rationale for a policy, it's not a idea of describing the policy versus giving a rationale. It's just saying, like, this is the reason why this is a big principle, and because of that principle, children should vote. So not D. E, it employs a term on two different occasions in different senses. What would be the term that's being used in two different senses? Undemocratic, interest. Nope, interest is being used the same. Again, we have to ask ourselves, does this happen? And it doesn't happen. Rossi doesn't use a term in vague ways. And so A is our answer for this one.